misty mountains rise, leave us standing upon the height. What was before, we see once more. Is our kingdom a distant light? Fiery mountain beneath the moon, words unspoken will be there soon. For home a song that echoes on, and all who find us will know it's you. Some folk we never fall, some time we never fall.
Alright, this is going to be marathon day. I'm going to upload these videos on different days because I know it's overload to do it repeatedly, but I think this is the 6th video I've done today. This is a video one of the very rare videos that I at one point recorded before and then never uploaded. Last year, actually more than a year ago, I made a video similar to this, and for whatever reason I never uploaded it. I just wasn't happy with what I talked about. This is a little bit different, but I made this video last year because I just read the Iliad, and after reading the Iliad, I had, thought about the differences between it and the movie Troy, and I thought that they were kind of interesting, and I made a video about it. But then I was thinking about it, I thought it's really not that interesting. I mean, the big difference is in Illiad, the gods are active participants, and in Troy, it's like a society that the character Eric Bana, who plays Hector, is basically saying there are no gods. They never actively intervene, although there are certain events that, to a religious person in the show or in the movie, could interpret as being the will of the gods. They don't actively intervene. In the Iliad, their Ares is jumping down there and joining the fight, and Venus is jumping in and interceding on Paris's behalf, and eventually, Athena is key in Achilles defeating Hector, and on and on and on, and that's like by far the biggest difference between the two is that element of the narrative. But I thought that's not all that interesting. And then a few months ago, I saw the movie again, about a month ago, and I really think that movie it does the Iliad justice. It just eliminates all the god stuff. But then as I was watching the movie, at the end they had a song playing, and it's a Josh Groban song. Kind of a gimmick that they attach with the movie so they can show a music video to promote the movie. But the name of the song is called "Remember Me." I'll try and put a link to the music video. And the lyrics to that are very interesting, and I think very pertinent to some of the themes that run through the whole Troy Homeric epic Iliad storyline. And that is the idea of immortality through becoming historic, and the distinction between myth, legend, and actual real events, which is something that the Homeric epics always, any looking at, always conjures up that debate, that consideration. Is the Trojan War something that really happened, or is it just folklore that got recorded later, or is it embellished in some sense? And I think, of course, the most likely one is a combination of the two, but I'll get into that in a little bit. One of the lines in the song that Josh Groban sings is that it says, "If you remember me, as long as you remember me, I'm still around." And it's interesting, there are physicists who basically believe this, that information can never be destroyed, and as long as the information of your existence exists, then at least in a certain sense, then so do you. And I I guess the consensus, or if not the consensus, the majority of physicists believe, and there are people who disagree with this, and who knows, they might be the ones who are right in the end, but who believe the information cannot be destroyed, which would mean literally that the potential to fully understand and to fully reconstruct past history is physically possible. Uh, Although currently that information is so scattered and chopped up that we don't have the means to even identify it, let alone piece it back together to form coherent understanding. This even went so far. There was a debate between two physicists about Stephen Hawking was basically saying, look, if you put information in a black hole, it's gone. And the other guy countered, yeah, but if you put information into a black hole, the mass of the black hole changes, which will change the surface tension or surface size. And so that information, it's not really gone because it's still recorded in the subsequent diameter of the black hole. Now, if we were to throw, say, the Illiad into a black hole, I don't know, we're not to the point where we can look at the subsequent black hole and piece back together the Illiad, but hypothetically that's the idea. And interestingly, and I don't think this was intentional, but the song to the movie kind of portrays that. And if you think the character Achilles, and this is more explicit in the movie than in the books, is kind of consciously, actively working towards that reality. His view was, and he says something in the movie like, look, we're all going to die, and the difference between me and you is that I'm such an amazing person that people are going to remember me, and they're going to talk about me. And so in thousands of years, no one's going to know who you are, but they're going to know who I am. And what's interesting about that is it might literally, actually, historically be true. There may have been a character, a person back then who thought that, said that, and they would be right because we are. Now, I can't confirm that. It's quite possible that that's alliteration or later addition, but it's very, very intriguing to think about. Now, in terms of the historicity of the actual Trojan War, the main source, obviously, is Homer's Iliad, although I think Hesiod also referenced it. For a long time, people believe that Homer wrote this stuff down. Now, the main scholarship today thinks that Homer was probably alive in the 7 to 800s BC, before there was a known Greek alphabet. There's something called Linear A and Linear B, and it's possible maybe there was a Greek alphabet back then, but that basically Homer predates literature in Greece, and that his stories were oral. People have these oral stories that they attributed to Homer, that he was the initiator of these stories, and later generations wrote them down. Now, they certainly had been written down by the time of classical Greece. There are the oldest actual copies of the Iliad aren't that old, but there are older copies that are references to the Iliad that we can say, okay, well, if they're referencing it, then it had to have been around. Most people place the time of the Trojan War happening in the 12 to 1300 BCE, before the Common Era. This would put it about the same time of the earliest recorded battles. The earliest battles that we have actual data on, or historical documentation. The first one is Megiddo, and the second one, only a few years later, that's much better known, is called the Battle of Kadesh. Sometimes spelled with a Q, sometimes spelled with a K. The Battle of Kadesh was a battle between Ramses II, I think I'm getting that right, and the Hittite Empire, I think under Hattusili II, but I might be remembering that wrong. At the time, Egypt had an empire that is extended into the Levant, what is today Palestine. The Hittite Empire was based in central Anatolia and extended for a time over to Asia Minor, but also south into Syria. And there are a whole bunch in what is today Syria and Lebanon, puppet states, smaller states that were aligned with one or the other, and they were fighting quite a bit. And the Battle of Kadesh is part of that struggle, and Megiddo was also part of that struggle, but it was a little bit before. I don't know why, because people always say Kadesh is the first battle, but then they talk about Megiddo happening like 10 years before that. I'm like, oh, well, so obviously they know about Megiddo. I think there's just a lot less information about Megiddo. That would put this, but anyway, that battle is about contemporary with the Trojan War. Now, if Homer's epic is correct, then there's a great deal more detail about the Trojan War than there is about the Battle of Kadesh and Megiddo. A great deal more detail, and it's actually, when you read the Iliad in English translation, it's very awkward at first. The style is very strange. I've never read anything like it, and it took some getting used to. But once you do, there is definitely a literature quality to it that is really, really fascinating, because you don't see that. The Egyptian stuff is just Ramses carved on a stela, like, I did this, I did that, blah blah blah. It's not like a story. It's not really narrative so much as a curriculum vitae for a megalomaniacal pharaoh. Saying, I killed this, I cut off this many penises, I stormed this many walls. I mean, his version of Megiddo, basically, he saves the day. The Iliad is not like that. And the other interesting thing about the Iliad is it talks about the idea of history, and it talks about war, and it talks about the glory of war, but also talks in a very brutal, explicit way the brutality of war. It talks about their entrails going out, how it's a waste, and how they're full of life, and then they're destroyed. And this is this kind of stuff like, oh, this could have been written right after Vietnam, but it was written 2,500, almost 3,000 years ago. Excuse me. But then the question arises, and there's interesting things, because the type of combat that they describe in the Iliad, in the movie Troy, Hector and Achilles have this really awesome duel. If you watch the movie, it's a really interesting fight. Now, in the Iliad, they don't actually have an interesting fight like that. Hector just runs away from Achilles around Troy like 5 times, and then Athena tricks him and makes him think that his friends are there to help him, so he turns to fight, realizes that his friends aren't there, and basically just gives up and gets killed. However, the type of combat depicted in the movie, where they have this one-on-one kind of duel, that's the kind of combat that happens in the Iliad all the time. And most historians think, well, they kind of have an idea when that type of fighting would take place. The other thing is the names, the nouns used in the Iliad. They have some understanding of the etymology, and those, I don't remember this exactly right. The names sound like they're from an earlier part of the Bronze Age than the 1200s BC, or something along those lines. So they sound authentic, but they also sound like, they'd be like me talking about, well, this happened in the 1860s, and then describing all this stuff about, knights in armor and the stuff that happened 500 years before the 1860s. So there's some question there. Now, there is an interesting, in terms of the question of, is there any verification for this? There is some, actually. The Hittites, the same empire that fought the Egyptians, they were active in Asia Minor. And they record the power of the king of Akiawa. They call a powerful king of Akiawa. Now, in the Iliad, this is also confusing. He almost never says Greek. He says the Achaeans. The Greeks are referred to as Achaeans. And so the king of the Greeks would be the king of Akiawa. Now, that would be Agamemnon in the story. The Hittites also spoke of a adventurer prince in Asia Minor by the name of Priam Maladush, or in the story, the name of the king of Troy is Priam. There's also Paris is named, and they say that the king of Akiawa and the Achaeans were basically fighting a war against. Oh, yeah, this is interesting. The Iliad. The Iliad is actually a misspelling. Somehow, scholars have figured out that there's originally supposed to be a Greek letter dagama in front of the Iliad. Iliad is what Homer refers to as Troy. He doesn't say Troy. He says Ilios. So the Iliad is the story of Ilios, the story of this war around Troy. Researchers say that there was originally the Greek letter dagama in front of Ilion, which that makes a W sound. So originally it was actually Willian or Wilios. So the original Greek name for this city was Wilios. The Hittites record the destruction of the city of Wilusha by the Achaeans, and that they actually had a 200-year-long conflict. Now, in the Iliad, the war between Troy and Greece, or the Achaeans, is 10 years long, which seems like a long time. It seems likely, though, that there probably was a very long period of conflict between these two societies. Also, Troy today, the archaeological site that is usually considered to be Troy, is just south of the Dardanelles. It's in Turkey, in Asia Minor, which is an area that was Greek until after World War I, practically. And for a long time, people said, well, the ruins there are too small to be this big town, Troy. But the ruins they found are likely just the citadel itself. The city proper would have been much larger and perhaps surrounded by another retaining wall. I don't know if they've ever found that or not. So there is the possibility that the Hittites are talking, when they talk about Wilusha, Priam Maladush, and the king of Akiawa, that they're talking about the Mycenaeans, Priam, and Troy. Or not, maybe it's just a mistake. But I think it's really interesting that, we're not sure how much of this is true. I mean, the stuff with the gods is like, okay, there's no way. But he's clearly not. The stuff is not from whole cloth. He's describing a world that archaeology confirms existed, if not particular events. So, Troy is really interesting because it's like the earliest history, but it's also the earliest literature, and they're fused in a really in a total way, to the point where we can't really separate one from the other very well, if at all. I mean, to pull away the mythology is to pull away the story, but we know it's not all fake. So I don't know. I think the movie's good. Check out the song. It has some interesting ideas about living. I think, to me, it's very interesting to think that someone could think, I'm going to live forever because people are going to remember me in history. Physicists would agree that that's partially true. Think about it. If some scientist said, "Hey, we found a way to clone humans," who would they try and clone? Would they go, "Hey, let's clone private number 35"? They'd say, "No, let's clone somebody cool like Caesar or Achilles or Jesus or somebody famous, somebody who really did something worth remembering, worthy of our attention after all this time." Why should we have to bother remembering about some sheep herder who died, fucking goats? We shouldn't, but somebody who, well, and that's the other thing. Achilles is totally, I can't believe my latent statism blinded me to the ungodly brutality of a man who butchered many for his own vanity. Because in the movie, it's like, he says, I don't care about Troy. I don't have beef. They never did anything to me, but look, I'll be famous if I do this, so I'll just go and slaughter them as many as I can to burn my way into immortality. That's kind of sick and disgusting, but it's also fairly interesting. I definitely was rooting for Hector. Every time I watch that fight, I hope Hector's going to win, but he never does. So maybe we can clone the two of them and have a rematch, but I don't know. All right, that's it.